Welcome everybody to Go Local Live. I'm Josh Fenton, CEO and co-founder. It's been a rock and roll busy day. Everybody from John Giorgi, Dr. Fine. We went over to Italy and talked to Rebecca Cotto da Silva and Bolzano. We've had the governor's press conference. Now we end the day with the most exciting, the crowd cheering, Scott Cordischi, one of the leading sports analysts, announcers, thinkers in Rhode Island history, and original GoLocaler, now at Brown University. Scott, thanks so much for joining us.
Josh, thanks for having me. And by the way, flattery will get you everywhere.
So, you know, Scott's had that career, Syracuse grad, first The Score, helped launch The Score, which was a great radio station. Never made any sense why that went away. And then obviously with us, you've worked at Brown, you've been an announcer for Brown football and basketball over the years, do some work with WEEI, just a slew of different touch points. What is it like? There's no sports.
Are you trying to say that I'm a jack of all trades and a master of none? Because if that's what you're getting at, I can't argue that point. You know, Josh, it's been weird. It's been strange. I don't think any of us could have imagined that we'd ever be going through a situation like what we're living through right now. I mean, to not have sports. You know, go back to last week. The NFL made the decision, and I thought it was the right one, to hold their draft virtually. You know, when they announced that maybe a month before the draft, they took some criticism, even from NFL insiders like Adam Schefter, who said, I think this is insensitive. They should push it back a month to late May. And I said, no, just the opposite. Sports fans and just people in general are craving something to grab onto. And it's no coincidence. They did their best ratings ever for the NFL draft because, you know, as sports junkies, we want something real, something that we can sink our teeth into. So I thought that was awesome last week.
Yeah, I thought it was a good production. Listen, will they get better at it as they get more comfortable with doing something virtual like that? 100%. I thought, considering it, they did made a number of little tweaks, making it move faster was a huge positive as well. And having a lot of good voices, a lot of experts giving insights and a quick bites worked pretty well. They had very few technical difficulties, and having the coaches and the general managers' kids behind them was awesome, I thought. I thought it was just a really nice touch that was much different from in the draft room and the business of it. It just gave it a nicer touch and feel to it during a period of time like this. But now, when's the next thing we talk about, see, enjoy, bet on, anything?
So that's a great question, Josh. You know, NASCAR has announced they're coming back in the month of May. And, you know, we're starting to hear rumblings that the NBA is trying to consider a plan to, you know, resurrect the season. We're hearing rumblings that maybe it happens down at Disney and in Orlando, and they'll stay in the hotels down there, or baseball maybe getting together in Arizona at some of the spring training parks out there. I think there's a want to return, not necessarily to normalcy, but to just get some live sports action going. Even if that means in front of empty arenas, empty stadiums, just something for the average sports fan to sit home and watch on TV. And I do think it's going to happen. Now, again, when is that going to happen? I don't know. If I had to guess, I would say probably by the end of May, at the latest sometime in the month of June. I think we're going to have real sports again to sink our teeth into.
Been following the NBA discussion. The NBA has been interesting. LeBron's always got something to say, regardless of what the plan is. The amount of void is so mesmerizing. Whoever gets to market first is going to clean up. And I'm holding NASCAR aside because that's a southern sport, a Southwest sport. That's not, for the most part, a national sport, as any of the big four are. The one who gets on the playing field, on the hardcore, on the ice, is going to have a big advantage.
Oh, absolutely. They are going to have the most captive audience that they've had in years, which is why it might be who the sport of baseball, right? Which is a dying sport. I think it's an aging fan base. The attention span of millennials and the younger generations isn't great. And so they've turned away from the sport of baseball. They might be the ones that want to come back first because they can maybe grab the American sports fan again. Baseball hasn't been America's favorite pastime for years. It's the NFL. Football dwarfs Major League Baseball in terms of popularity. If they had any brains, they'd be the ones to come back first. I think it might be a race between them and the NBA. I'm curious to see who it is.
Listen, talk about the slowness of baseball. My son and I, one time a number of years ago, were switching between a Red Sox game and a pro lacrosse game. There were 3 goals scored in the lacrosse game between pitches of a baseball game. Okay, that is literally the difference in the speed of sports today. Let's go to football. Can we even imagine no football?
Well, I can tell you this. When you hear what they're saying down in SEC country, the Power 5 conferences are adamant about the fact that they have to have a 2020 football season. Now, does that mean they have it in the fall? Maybe not. We've heard rumblings. Maybe they kick it to the spring. But the bottom line is that is so much revenue for these Power 5 schools. They have to play. The TV revenue they get is just off the charts, and those universities and schools rely on it. So I think there will be a college football season. When it is, whether it's fall or spring, is it abbreviated? I don't know. The SEC came out and said yesterday, we don't necessarily need to align with other conferences to start our season. And what that tells me is they're not necessarily worried about playing non-league games. They'll just play league games if they have to have a season. So I think we're going to see college football. I just don't know if we're going to see it in stadiums with fans.
Yeah, I mean, listen, the Alabama red-white game pulls, 70, 80,000 fans for a spring football game. They're not going to have any problem monetizing the season if they move it to the spring. The health factors of it, the virus itself is just so unknown and how it impacts stuff. You're at Brown University. I've spoken to Mike Martin as recently as yesterday. Obviously, most colleges don't even know what is going to take place this coming fall. What's your thoughts on where the URIs are, the Providence College, the Brown Universities are?
You know, first of all, from an overall perspective, I'm sure you saw Christina Paxson's op-ed in the New York Times, and then she went on CNBC, and she talked about the fact that she really wants Brown to have students return to campus in the fall for the fall semester. Now, it may be a different look. People may be wearing masks. There may be social distancing. There may be smaller classroom sizes. But she would like to see that happen. Now, athletics, that's a whole different ball game. Now, what happens? I think contingency plans are being drawn up right now. And those could be, number one, maybe it is business as usual. We all hope that that's the case. If not, maybe there's some type of an abbreviated season that starts maybe in October as opposed to early September. Maybe they kick fall sports to the spring, like is being discussed in some of the Power 5 conferences. Who knows? What I can tell you is I don't necessarily think, at least to start, you're going to see teams making long trips and getting on airplanes. I think it's going to be more regional games, maybe just a league schedule, and that's it, where you can bus to your opponent's place. I don't know. If they do play sports in the fall, my guess is we'll definitely see league play, and we'll probably see it in empty stadiums.
For all of us who are fans, we know fall sports, winter sports, but the reality is winter sports have the longest seasons. They start almost the minute you come back to school. Basketball kicks up very, very early, hockey even earlier. They're skating. What's the implications for those two sports? And in a place like Brown, basketball and hockey are the big draws.
Yeah, so I can't speak for Brown and exactly what their plans are, but I would say it's probably similar to what they're talking about in terms of fall sports. And that is maybe they have to abbreviate the season and start later. Maybe they start their winter sports schedule in early January. Maybe it's just a league schedule and not non-league games. Maybe it is a full schedule. We certainly hope that that's the case. And I would not rule that out of the question right now. I really wouldn't. But I think there's so many different variables that come into play here. And I just think there's too many unknowns right now to be able to say, yeah, I think this is what's going to happen.
Sports is big business, multi-billions of dollars. It has implications to television revenue. It has implications for advertising. It's across the board. How bad a hit is this going to be, and what does it do to sports in the long term?
Well, I saw a report today, I believe it was on ESPN.com, that said sports was taking, I don't know what the number was, like a $12 billion hit, I think, in terms of revenue that's lost because of no sports going on for the amount of time It's huge. It's gigantic. You know it, Josh. I mean, whether it's big time college athletics, pro sports, you name it. One of the biggest things to get canceled was the NCAA men's basketball tournament. That is the primary revenue generator for the NCAA, and every NCAA institution receives money from that tournament. And because that tournament was not held, the men's basketball postseason tournament, every NCAA institution is going to be getting a lot less money from the NCAA this year, which they count on for their athletic budgets.
Speaking of that, there's a lot of discussion of how the transfer rules are gonna work. And usually, if you're at a D1 revenue sport and you transfer from one school to the other, you have to sit out a year. That's not true in lacrosse, as an example. You can transfer and play, but in basketball and football, what's the update on the transfer rule? Have they made a determination what they're going to do?
So the NCAA has a committee that came out yesterday and said they are not going to support for this year the waiver of the transfer rule. In other words, they're saying it's business as usual. If you want to transfer, you have to sit out a year before you're eligible. Now, that's just their recommendation. The NCAA board is going to vote on this in a few weeks toward the end of May. They don't necessarily have to take that recommendation, but my feeling is they probably will. And if that's the case, that's really going to hurt a school like the University of Rhode Island. If you look right now at URI and the unbelievable turnover they've had this offseason, if that transfer rule does not go into effect where transfers can play immediately this winter, they will have only 7 scholarship players this winter. That's going to make it tough for David Cox.
Those intramural stars, he'll be over at the intramural office checking who are the highest league scorers to get on the walk-in, and he'll be rating the football team to get anybody who's athletic. I mean, that's really where he will be, besides some late-minute potential junior college or late recruits, right?
Yeah, Josh, I mean, your phone may be ringing. David may be asking you, do you have any eligibility remaining, Fenton? We could use you down here in Kingston.
My lunch bunch days are far, far behind me, the legendary lunch bunch group. Scott, you've been in media. I mean, this is just, yesterday the Providence Journal laid off Kevin McNamara. The Providence Journal at one time they weren't the Boston Globe, which was the best sports page in the country. And the Boston Globe's not the Boston Globe as it used to be. The Providence Journal had a rock-solid sports page that covered, just about everything. It's gotten whittled down and whittled down. Would you ever think that they would lay off a Kevin McNamara? Great basketball coverage, a good columnist, tied to the community at every single level and widely respected.
Well, I'm really disappointed that it happened, but would I ever think that? Yes. I mean, Josh, to your credit and GoLocal's credit, you were ahead of the curve. I mean, you and I saw traditional media changing and how people use it 10 to 15 years ago. And that's why you launched GoLocal Prov, right? And I saw it in the radio business. I lost my job in 2008 because traditional media was changing. And so that's why I kind of decided to remake myself professionally. The newspaper business is dying a slow and painful death, unfortunately. And I hate the fact that Kevin McNamara is no longer going to be writing for the Providence Journal because he is the best college basketball writer that I know, and he covered things with absolutely no agenda. He was very fair in his reporting, and I can't say enough about Kevin McNamara. Very disappointed, but am I surprised? No. We've seen this coming for years.
Where do we go in sports locally? You see the universities trying to almost create their own news networks. That's fine, but it's all rah-rah, cheer, fundraise, sell season tickets. It's not journalism per se. Do we see a new structure? GoLocal clearly is going to keep expanding its sports coverage, but where does it go not in Providence? Where does it go in, Mobile, Alabama, to be able to cover important sports teams in the business of sports, which doesn't nearly get enough coverage?
Well, so the big time places like Alabama, they're always going to have the national TV deals, right? The SEC with CBS or with ESPN, pick your major network, right? They'll always have the coverage. Many of the schools are starting their own networks. The University of Texas started their own network. Our conferences are starting their own networks. The SEC, the ACC, the Big Ten, they all have their own networks. So I think a lot of it's going there. But you're right. I mean, media is changing, and the way people sample media and where they get their information has changed. The younger generations, they don't buy the newspaper. They don't sit down and watch the evening news. They get everything they want on their phone instantaneously. So that's just where we're heading, and the media business needs to adapt to that.
Yeah, and covering the game story, who had the most points, who had the most rebounds. Listen, you can get that real time from your phone on any Division I game as it's going on while you're sitting in a restaurant. Scott, you're at Brown. I'm not looking for any inside, but what's the tenor? You talk to folks at Brown, you talk to folks at other universities locally. What's the overall attitude about kind of the future of college sports locally?
Well, I think at Brown, they'll always be committed to athletics because they understand what an important part it is to the student experience and student life at Brown University. We have 38 different varsity athletic programs. So Brown's done a great job of providing ample opportunity for male and female student athletes to have a spot on a varsity team. In fact, I think Brown has the second largest athletic department in terms of varsity teams, behind only Harvard, who has 40 some odd varsity teams. So look, they're not going away. I think we've hit a bump in the road here with the pandemic that we're all going through, but I would be very surprised if a year from now, if things aren't returning to normal. Short term, yeah, we've seen a couple of colleges here and there saying we have to drop this sport, but I think that's the exception, not the rule. I think we'll be back to normal in another year or so. But, for now, we just have to make it through these difficult times.
Let's go to NFL. Let's just assume we're back on the field, whether it's empty stadiums and it's just a TV experience or not. But let's assume there's an NFL season for this year. Will we have a season in which we forget Tom Brady in New England, or will we be lamenting his departure?
That's a great question. I think Patriots fans are going to be watching two teams this year, the Patriots and the Buccaneers, right? Because, there's some that love Tom Brady and love Gronk and are going to root for them to do well. I'm not in that camp. As Jerry Seinfeld says, I root for the laundry. And I don't care. I mean, if Bill Belichick had been the guy that walked out of town to take a coaching job somewhere else, I wouldn't root for him and whatever team he's coaching either. I root for the New England Patriots. So I want them to do well. And I personally could not care less if Tom Brady or Gronk have a good season in Tampa. In fact, I almost don't want them to, because that would be an admission that the Patriots screwed up by letting them go down there. So, when's there going to be an NFL season? I hope it starts on time. I'm hearing rumblings. Maybe it gets pushed back to maybe sometime in October, but I think we will have an NFL season. Absolutely. And I think the Patriots have made it very clear. They are very confident in Jarrett Stidham. At least they're putting all their quarterback eggs in his basket. They didn't do anything in the draft. They haven't done anything in free agency. They just officially listed him as the top quarterback on their depth chart. They like this kid, and they want to see what he can do. And I think Bill Belichick relishes this type of challenge.
Relative to the laundry issue, when Chuck Fairbanks left the Patriots high and dry in the 1970s, I did not become a University of Colorado fan. So I'm in the same camp. It's interesting about this quarterback succession. I actually worked, Drew Bledsoe was a client of mine, my firm, advertising PR firm, when he got injured, when Mo Lewis hit him and knocked him out. And, there was the public assumption that he would come back once he was healed. And those who kind of were around the Bledsoe world knew very well that Bill Belichick loved Tom Brady, absolutely loved him from the very beginning of them picking him up, and was very, very committed to seeing him develop. And I think there was always a sense that this was a real risk for Drew Bledsoe's future in New England. Maybe the same thing is going on now in their decision to let Tom Brady go. Maybe they saw those intangibles every day in practice that they like so much.
So the easy answer would be, if Drew Bledsoe had a better PR firm, maybe he would have gotten his job back when he was healthy back then. You sewed that one up for me. That was just too easy, Josh. No, seriously, I think if you go back to the Bledsoe Brady transition, what we learned was, in retrospect, that Belichick and the coaching staff saw something they liked in Tom Brady in practice, in camp. So when it came time for him to take over, they weren't surprised that he performed as well as he did, and they did not hesitate to keep him in there and keep Bledsoe on the bench once Bledsoe was healthy. And I think it's a very similar dynamic here, right? Jarrett Stidham, I think they liked what they saw in camp last summer. And I think more importantly, and a lot of people don't know this, Brady, because of his age and his arm, did not take a lot of reps during the week, during the regular season in practice. A lot of those reps were given to Jarrett Stidham. They like what they saw from this kid in practice, and so they felt confident enough to go into the draft without having to draft a quarterback and without signing anybody in free agency. So I think it's a similar dynamic to what we had 20 years ago when Brady took over for Bledsoe.
Scott, last thoughts. You're thinking about sort of the future of sports. Has sports really embedded itself in people's minds of, oh my God, I miss it so much, it's so painful to go through the week? Or the absence of sports, did people kind of reinvent their lives, find other things to binge watch, and take up reading and other things? What's the relationship between the fan and sports?
I think, in all due respect to, and look, it's been a nice time in that we've become even closer with our families. And, I used to joke to my friends, I looked to my right the other night and I saw this pretty woman sitting on the couch next to me. She seems nice. She's my wife. Her name's Karen. Because, I'm always watching a ball game, right? When sports is on, and that's just who I am. I love sports. So I come home, I turn on the TV, and I'm watching a hockey, a basketball, a baseball, a football game. But I think sports fans will go right back to their old habits. I think we miss it all dearly, and so I would be surprised if there's any ill effects. I think the one immediate effect you'll have is, are people a little leery of going to arenas and ballparks, right? Worried that they might catch something. So maybe it's 1 year, 2 years, 3 years before you see people packing ballparks and arenas again. But I really think that's the only after effect. I think people are going to watch it and it'll be business as usual. And, the one thing we haven't talked about, Josh, is, in the years of GoLocal and what you created is just such a great and magnificent thing for people in Rhode Island and Southern New England. But I remember when I helped you start the sports department, and there were 3 stories that I remember in particular that just went viral. The amount of clicks, the amount of reads and 2 were in 2011. The hiring of Ed Cooley, which we had before anybody else, and the Bruins winning the Stanley Cup, beating Vancouver in Game 7. And then in 2012, the hiring of Dan Hurley. And the funny part about that was we were all over that like we were the Cooley hiring in the year before. But we had people like Jeff Goodman and Paul Kenyon and even Thor Bjorn, the AD, telling us, no, it's not official. But I had people close to Hurley telling me it was a done deal. He just had to go back to Wagner to talk to his team first before he came back to Rhode Island. But he had accepted the job. But those 3 stories stick out in my mind as stories that just went viral on GoLocal in our early days.
Yeah, absolutely. Gave us a lot of credibility. We didn't miss a beat. We also broke Hurley going to UConn as well and infuriated ESPN. Let's go back to the Cooley story, because this is a really good story. We had just launched, we wanted to be so credible, build up trust with the readers. And I want to say you broke that story almost 10 full days before it took place. It broke on a Monday or a Tuesday. On Friday night, I know exactly where I was. We were getting, the only way I can say it is crapped on. Sports fans were killing us. You don't know what you're doing. You guys are idiots. And I was down in Baltimore with my son for a lacrosse tournament he was playing in. I called you up on Friday night. I'm like, Scott, are you sure we got this story right? Should we back off this a little bit? Just in case. You're like, nope, I got it. I've got multiple sources. I know it. I've got it locked in. I said, okay, I trust you. So we go Saturday. We go Sunday. We go Monday. Tuesday, finally, PC leaks it out and it gets confirmed. on Tuesday. That was a big, bold story by Scott Cordischi. Now, my favorite part of it was you went back to all the commenters on our site and you put, when it was finalized, that story that it was finalized against every single one of those comments on our site and on social media. It was great.
Well, you know how it goes in the business, right? You have to have sources. And in this case, I had multiple sources, but one in particular that I trusted immensely, 100%. And I knew that this was the case. They held a search and they interviewed multiple people, but they had eyes for one person and one person only, and that was Ed Cooley. So I knew that he was their guy. And it's hard to say they didn't make a great decision, right? You look at the job Ed's done at Providence College. He's been terrific for that program and that school.
I think you break down the numbers any possible way. I hate to say it, people, Dave Gavitt fans and Joe Mulaney fans will go crazy, but he is the single most important coach in that program's history. It is a much more difficult thing to do, the consistency that he's been able to pull off. And take PC, who had been kind of a second-tier top conference team, and put it up towards the top tier of a leading conference. Not an easy thing to do year in, year out. Very, very difficult degree of difficulty. It was absolutely, those early days, we had John Giorgi on earlier. It was just tremendous. And I just want to say thanks to you, everything you've done. You've been a great voice in Rhode Island, too, on sports. I mean, I remember listening to you on The Score. It was the smartest talk radio ever in this market. And it was just wildly insightful, and you continue to do it in all the different ways that you touch sports in Rhode Island. So thank you so much. For everybody else, stay tuned. We'll have more up on GoLocal. Governor's made some significant announcements this afternoon. And please stay safe, everybody. Scott, thanks again.
Josh, thank you. And if I can give myself a quick plug, myself and Nick Coit tomorrow morning on WEEI will have retired Patriots fullback and former Brown University defensive lineman James Devlin as our guest. So we'll talk to Jimmy about his retirement. What a great career he had.
Absolutely. Multiple rings. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.